Hello everyone, Voodoo here, and today we are continuing in line of our tier list series, and we're going to be talking about raid DPS. Now, a few short notes. One, this raid is very single target focused. It's actually kind of crazy how ST focused it is. So if you're a class that brings good or great or amazing ST, I will be valuing that very highly in this tier list ranking. Keep that in mind. Two, bring the player, not the class. Outside of getting your required buffs, a better player on a quote-unquote worse class will almost always perform better for you and your raid than a worse player on a quote-unquote better class. So just keep that in mind as we go through here. Use these tier lists to inform your decision, not to make your decision, right? You gotta get a little bit of thought in there, a little bit of human thought, a little bit of considering the variables. Very hard to nail everything down at once. But with that out of the way, if you're on the content, drop a like, comment down below, agree with me, disagree with me, be civil about it. And if you really enjoy the content, hit the sub button. You'll get tons more WoW content in your feed that way. Help support me as well. So that out of the way, let's get on to the tier list. All right, so we are going to start off today with Affliction Warlock. We're just going to go down alphabetically here. There's timestamps for each class, so if you want to just skip to whatever class you're going to play, or whatever class you're thinking of playing, go right ahead. But we're starting with Affliction Warlock. I'm going to put them up in B tier. I do think Affliction Warlock is a solid choice to the upcoming raid. However, their single target is decent, but they just fall pretty far behind the other two Warlock specs, which definitely throws them down into B tier here. Their damage profile is pretty good, but they just lose a little bit of that single target that the other two Warlock specs bring. Of course, you're going to need a Warlock in your raid. Gate, Lockstones, Summoning Closets, Soulstones, all those things are incredibly valuable. And I do think that its damage profile of dots is pretty good. There's lots of high uptime for ranged, at least, fights. You can cleave with them very well on multiple different fights with two spread targets. So they're going to be very good at that. But I think in general, they just lose out a bit because the other two Warlock specs are just so crazy strong. But Affliction is decent. It does really good single target damage. I think B tier is pretty fair for it. I'm going to throw Arcane up in B as well. Now, Arcane could go up in A. However, I don't think they're the best mage spec, which I do think means they do drop down a little bit here. Their damage is strong. They do bring in a very, very strong burst profile here. But I do think that Frost's damage profile with the ability to cleave pretty consistently, as well as just that nice, consistent damage with that high uptime, which you will have as a ranged. There's lots of mechanics for melee that kind of force you out that ranged players can kind of just keep casting during. So with that in mind, I do think that Arcane will lose a little bit there as if movement happens during your burst, you're kind of screwed, kind of shit out of luck. And there is that possibility for it to happen. Lots of random effects here that the other range specs might not have the as much downtime with. I do think overall they're pretty strong though. If you want to play Arcane, you definitely can. It's very close between it and Frost, the better mage spec in my opinion, but they're very close together. I do think Arcane is pretty strong. Moving on to Arms now. Arms, again, I'm going to put in B tier. Their single target damage is kind of just a little bit mediocre, which is why I think they're in B tier. They do have very, very good two target cleave, which will come in handy on a few fights. The second to last fight, Neltharion, there's lots of two target cleave in that fight, and then some burst AoE at the end. The very final fight, we're not 100% sure. I think there's some ads on that. Looks like there might be some cleave. There's a cleave boss. So there are opportunities for things like sweeping strikes and stuff like that to shine. But overall, I do think that Fury is just way better in this tier. So you're going to get a little bit more mileage out of that. And Arms is single target, and Execute Niche just might not be as impactful as what Fury Warrior can bring for you in this upcoming tier. Moving next to Assassination Rogue here, and I do think Assassination is going to be a very strong Rogue spec, putting it up in A tier. So the Rogue ones, from what I've seen, are very early on. So I did a lot of research on Sims and in a bunch of different class discords. The Rogue ones are not very finalized right now, so I will say all my Rogue rankings, take them a bit of salt. But Assassination is performing very well. They're doing very solid single target DPS. They are not having some of the issues of downtime that other melee have because there's so much dot-based damage. Dots and bleeds and stuff like that is a lot of their damage. So when they're forced out of melee, they still have that ability to keep doing damage because their poisons, their bleeds, all that things are still ticking on the boss, which I do think will be very good for them. You want a Rogue in your party for the 3% damage reduction poison that they bring. Assassination Rogue is a great way of bringing that because of how much single target damage they can pump out. So I do think that Assassination will end up being a very good pick in the upcoming raid. Boomy is next. Now, Boomy I'm going to put in A tier as well. They bring really solid single target damage, but on top of that, Starfall is just such an efficient cleave tool on those fights that do have some cleave. I think Boomy is situated to do very well in this tier. Now, they received a decent sized rework coming from last tier to this one, and I do think that can impact them a little bit, but I think overall it is a net positive. They're losing their incredibly strong tier set, but they're getting basically retuned around that to work a little bit better. And overall, I do think Boomy, with its single target damage profile and its ability to do kind of that spread cleave with Starfall, I think will end up being very, very good. Bonus points if you get, if Neltharion right now has a mind control thing where you kind of go hostile but still can control your character. Now, if Boomy gets that and decides to Starfall you, that'd be pretty funny. Bonus points for that. Next up is BM Hunter, and BM Hunter I think is one of our only D tier specs this tier. Now this could be because of the state of Hunter sims. I know there's some weird stuff going on with Azorothan and like sims available and stuff like that. But BM specialization is and always has been like single target damage. Yeah, they can have pretty strong and efficient cleave with beast cleave and stuff like that. But overall, I do think that their single target output is just so weak right now. And the lack of real beast cleavable bosses, there's a few, but they're not really that important. Definitely lowers BM's viability in this next upcoming patch, at least in my opinion. Their ability to move around is great, of course, but I don't think it'll be that impactful. Like, yeah, there'll be some downtime that they won't experience that other ranged will. But I think overall, their single target is just so low, especially compared to the other two Hunter specs, that I do think throwing them down in D tier is just kind of where they belong for this moment. I do think they need some single target help for sure. Demo Warlock, on the other hand, is the highest single target damage output in the game. It's just absolutely crazy the amount of damage the Demonology Warlock can output, especially with PI. I think with PI, their sim jumps up like 30,000 DPS or something like that. It is absolutely ridiculous how strong this class is in single target. I think you might see this class stacked even in World First, which is crazy. I guess Blizzard saw a tier where Warlock wasn't in a World First kill last in Vulcan Incarnates for like Kirog or something, and decided to never have that happen again. Because oh boy is this class strong. It's kind of ridiculous how much damage they can output. Very strong class, one to keep an eye out for sure. Destruction actually also falls into this tier. I don't think it doesn't do quite as much pure single target as Demonology does, and it does suffer a bit more from downtime, but there are tons of fight with two target cleaves that I do think Destruction will end up performing very well in, that Demonology won't do as good. So if you're a Warlock, you're looking very happy. You have a really strong single target spec. You have a really strong two target cleave spec, and those are the predominant damage types in this upcoming raid. It's either single target nukes or basically single target with two target cleave. So these two specs here are really going to carry Warlock into the top tiers of the upcoming raid. They're so crazy powerful. I cannot put into words how strong these two specs are. It is crazy. Look out for these in your raid. Next up, we're moving on to Devastation Evoker, and I think Devastation Evoker is situated in a very good spot. They got a rework pretty recently on their talent tree, which I think honestly is a pretty good overall change. Fixed a lot of different issues. There's also talks of potentially a legendary weapon, and we don't really know what that is. I think if the legendary weapon is strong enough, I could see it bumping up to S tier, because already without this legendary weapon, they are in a strong A tier. Now there's that leak. I'm not sure if that leak's real or not, so we're going to pretend it's not. If that leak is real, maybe there'll still be an A tier, but we don't know either way. But on its own merit, it does very strong single target and two target damage, which again is the name of the game in Aberrus the Shadow Crucible, that most of the bosses are one or two targets. I do think they fall behind a bit from some of the Warlocks just because their output isn't the tippy top tier. Generally, the way I base this off of is if things were simming in BIS for over 140, then definitely up in that S tier, as well as some other different variables. I do think that Devastation Evoker is very strong. They have a good way of dealing with ad waves as well, with Deep Breath or Pyre if they need to. I think overall they're just incredibly powerful. We'll see if that legendary weapon bumps them up even higher, but for now, because I don't know what the legendary weapon is, we're going to put it down in A tier. Elemental Shaman, I think, also belongs up in A tier. Ellie Shaman, very powerful single target. Honestly, doing a lot of it. Their one weakness is that while they're doing this really crazy strong single target, they can't also spec into cleave or AoE. But I think that a lot of these fights have enough single target focus where you're able to bring those single target specialists into this raid and shine. Rashog, Ziskarin, and Magmarax are all predominantly single target bosses. Now, Ziskarin does have some adds. You can group up and kind of cleave down a little bit. And Ellie can be good at with Earthquake, but again, if you're in that single target build, you do lose out a lot on those AoE things. But overall, I think that Ellie's single target is just so strong that I think it does warrant them an A tier ranking. Enhancement Shaman, I think could also definitely be in S tier. I'm going to put them in A. The reason they're an A tier for me is because of just the nature of the randomness of their class. There's a lot of procs to react to, and if you're able to react to all these procs in like a superhuman, almost computer-like state and get everything in one, not waste a single thing, not munch anything, I do think they belong up in S tier. But I do think there's a good deal of RNG involved in the class, and a lot of human error can go into this and cause it to be wrong. So I do think that on average, they won't perform as well as they sim. So I think I'll put them down in A tier. They do perform very well. They do bring Wind Fury Totem, which is a great boon. I do think overall, though, this is a melee weak tier. But again, Enhancement Shaman has that thing that all the good melee are going to have, for the most part anyways, where they can do some damage out of range, which I think is very important for this tier. Because of just how many melee unfriendly mechanics there are. Enhancement Shaman, I do think overall very, very strong, very, very solid pick in the upcoming tier. Feral Druid, I'm going to put in B tier. Sorry, Fiesta. So Feral Druid is one of those specs that is situated more so for AoE these days than it is for single target. Kind of a reverse of how it used to be back in Shadowlands and stuff. And in general, there's just not a lot of AoE in this raid. I do think overall Feral Druid does bring a pretty solid single target profile, which is why I'm giving them a B. And they do bring stuff like Druid buff, they bring B-res, they bring a roar, they bring Barkskin. They're very, very tanky, you know. But I think overall their single target and their two target just isn't anything absolutely insane. It's not bad, but it's not like insane top tier or anything like that. So I do think a B ranking is a pretty fair place for them. Next up, we're going to do Fire Mage. Now, I think Fire is going to be a C tier right now. Now, a lot of people are probably thinking Fire is really good in the raid, and that would be true, but they did receive some single target buffs recently, which honestly put them really high up. But then there were some issues with their sims where Ignite was like double or triple ticking, which caused an Ignite nerf on Blizzard's end, and honestly, they're not doing that great right now in single target. I do think they're pretty good in AoE, which we'll get to tomorrow, I guess, but I think in single target, they're just not great. And this is a predominantly single target raid. They do have cheat death, ice block, all that stuff, but I think overall they're just kind of in C tier right now. They're just not outputting as much damage as you want them to. Frost is going to be an A tier spec though. Now Frost and Arcane have very similar like overall damages, but I do think that Frost damage profile will be a little bit more valuable this tier. They do a little bit better 2-target cleave, and again, there's lots of 2-target cleave in this raid. And their single target is also just very respectable. So I think overall, Frost, pretty good spec overall. There's a few fights too where I think double ice block could be pretty useful. Rash Shock, if you get soaked a lot, Magmarax, stuff like that. I do think double ice block would be good, as well as just their kind of 2-target cleave, single target kind of niche. But I do think that Frost overall is pretty good. Frost DK on the other hand, put them down in C tier. I just don't think their damage is that great. I do think Unholy is going to bring a lot more single target damage for purposes here. Now, they do have pretty good 2-target cleave, so I could see them moving up in like the last 2 bosses or something like that. But I think overall, they're just going to be a little bit worse than Unholy is, so I think I'll put them down in C tier for now. Not saying they're bad or anything, I'm just saying they're outclassed by some of the other options that are available to you in that spec. Sorry, in that class. Fury Warrior. S tier. I think Fury absolutely cranks this tier. Absolutely does a ton of single target DPS, some of the highest out of all of the melee. I just think the amount of damage they do is kind of crazy. They can cleave that very efficiently with Whirlwind and stuff like that. Kind of not even reducing, I don't know why I said reducing, but just increasing how much value they have in the other fights as well. Getting that 2-target damage profile, very, very strong. Doing all that single target damage while also being able to just freely cleave is kind of really crazy. Fury also brings Battle Warrior Shout, the 5% attack power. They bring the Health Shout, the Raid CD. Very, very powerful. Really, really good spec. Definitely one to watch in the upcoming tier. Havoc, on the other hand. Now, Havoc, I think, definitely could be C tier just based on how much single target damage they do. But I'm going to put that in B. There's a few reasons here. I think Havoc's the best way to bring the magic debuff. I don't think Vengeance will be as good. There's lots of competition in the tank slots right now. And on top of that, magic debuff is just the best debuff in the game. It's just a crazy amount of damage for your raid. Tons of different classes deal magic. Out of all these specs up here, Most of them are buffed by the magic brand. Literally just Fury isn't. All the other ones here have some form of damage that is buffed by Havoc, which is just kind of crazy. So that kind of alone brings them up in B tier. They also bring Darkness, which can be a pretty useful raid defensive, like ticking damage or singular big hits. Anything where you have that opportunity for a lot of the raid to dodge that damage can be very, very powerful. Overall, I think they're just pretty solid in terms of their utility and stuff they bring. They're tanky. Their damage is bad though. Now there's like ad waves in the last 2 bosses, which they can pad on. It's just kind of pad damage. They don't really help you kill the boss really. But you know, is what it is. If they were just pure single target in this raid, I think it'd be down in C. If Vengeance was better, I think they'd be down in C. Because I think they're the best way to bring brand, and because I do think that there's some ad pad in the last 2 bosses, I do think B tier is a good spot for them. MM will be up in A tier. Again, really strong single target damage, really good ability to cleave. Those 2 things together make for a very good spec. It's probably your best Hunter spec. Now, Hunter in general just doesn't have a raid buff, so we'll see if they make it in over some other options like multiple Warlocks. But if you're playing a Hunter, you want to be playing Marksmanship, it definitely is doing the most damage out of all the different Hunter specs. The thing is just kind of a good place to be. They can 2-target cleave pretty well. They're pretty mobile. Now, of course, they can't move while while casting aim shot. But that is about it. Every other ability they have can be casted while moving, which is a good boon for them. And of course, they also have Turtle. While Turtle is a bad immunity, it is still an immunity, and immunities are very valuable for raid progression. Outlaw, I'm going to put down in D tier. I don't think Outlaw's single target damage is high enough to really compete in this raid, especially compared to the other 2 Rogue specs. They can do very good cleave, but again, that 2-target cleave niche, Outlaw, Assassination can do very well as well with their dots. And those ads in the fast 2 phases of the last 2 bosses, I just don't think are very important. I think it'd be a bit patty to kind of focus on those. Again, though, I do think Outlaw is fine overall. I mean, like, if it were more AoE focused, I think they could definitely move up. I think their pure single target, from what I've seen, is just so low that they belong down in D tier and need some help. Ret, on the other hand, easy S tier. Ret Paladin does a ton of damage. They have just like 20-yard range in most of their abilities, which lets them do damage while outside of boss range, which is insanely strong for this tier, because there truly are lots of mechanics that do force some downtime on melee, and Ret has built-in ways of dealing with those, which is just really, really good. They bring Bubble. They bring a really strong utility profile with Blessing of Sacrifice. They bring 1 of 2 needed buffs, either in Devotion Aura or in Retribution Aura, which are very, very strong. Overall, Retribution Paladin has the whole package: damage, unkillability, utility, raid buff, easy S tier spec, way up there. Next up is Shadow Priest. I'm going to put Shadow in the bottom of A tier. So I think Shadow's single target is solid, but not anything too crazy. But I do think that Shadow, A, brings PI, which is insane for the 2 Warlock specs. And on top of that, also has pretty good cleave. You can do spread cleave with them. You can do some really far out things. So I think that alone kind of puts them up in A tier. They're solid overall. They have strong defensiveness. They bring Priest buff. They can PI your Warlocks. And they do bring a strong damage profile for the raid. So I think that alone gives them an A tier ranking. Sub-Rogue, I'm going to put it down in C tier. Again, I just don't think the single target damage that these Rogue specs can bring is enough to really warrant them being higher. I do think they're pretty solid overall, and I think they're really good in Mythic Plus. But there's just not a lot of ads in this raid. Same reason why I think Feral and Havoc are kind of ranked lower. There's just not a lot of things to add to like burst on with their sub like AoE damage. There can be some stuff in like the final 2 bosses. They could be really good there because of like funnel and stuff like that. But I think overall, as a trend with the whole raid, I think C tier is probably the best spot for them. Survival Hunter, I'm going to put in B tier. They're really actually good this tier on single target damage, which is pretty surprising. They're not as good as Marksmanship. They're not as good as the other they're not the top Hunter spec. And they are melee, which I do think kind of brings them down a bit. But overall, like if you're a Survival Hunter, you're not going to feel like you're dragging down your raid. You definitely have a lot of single target like abilities here. There's some other stuff involved, right? Like they have to do that harpoon little thing where they go out of range and harpoon back in, and it's kind of weird there. And their bombs were buffed a bit to do some cleave damage, but really they're just doing kind of pure single target. And if you're doing that, Marksmanship's going to be a little bit better at that, and you're also just in melee, which is not a great place to be. Unholy DK is going to be A tier as well. They bring a lot of single target damage, and most of it is pet based as well. They can move away from the boss. They can actually, I'm pretty sure, do almost all of their rotation away from the boss if they take Clawing Shadows. Now, I'm not 100% sure if they can take that or where that is on their tree or anything like that, but I know that overall they do really good burst with army on pull. They do really good damage overall. A lot of it is pretty immune to just being like downtimed, which is really good. I think all in all, they are very solid and will perform very well in the next raid. And finally, we have Windwalker. I'm going to put Windwalker in C tier. Now, you could make an argument for Havoc, like the same one I made for Havoc, where they belong in B because they're buff. But there's a few reasons why I have them down here. A, they don't have like a raid defensive like Havoc does. B, their single target is just worse than Havoc's is, even after all the buffs and changes and stuff like that. They're just a little bit worse at that. And C, I do think their buffs are a little bit worse overall. And I do think that Mistweaver or Brew could be very solid options to bring that Monk debuff. The Monk debuff, 5% physical damage, is a lot worse than 5% magical damage. In terms of physical, this is buffed, this is buffed, this is buffed. Some of this is buffed, this is buffed. Some of this is buffed. And like some of this, and like very few of this. So physical damage for the top, for the A through S specs, physical buffs a lot less than magic does. So it's like a little bit of a worse debuff. On top of that, their single target is just going to be a little bit worse than Havoc's is. They still can do really good burst AoE add damage, but again, there's not that many of them, and I don't think the adds that do exist are super important. If they are, then definitely Monk could rise up. But I think overall, Windwalker is going to be down towards the C tier in this raid. So these are my thoughts and rankings of the DPS specs going into Aberrus the Shadow Crucible. Now again, this is recorded on May 4th, so if there's tuning after this, well, then I guess I'm wrong. But this is kind of where everything stands, for me at least personally. I do think this raid is very single target focused, and I do think that definitely has a push on which specs are going to be viable. Overall though, definitely everything is doable. You can definitely clear all the content with whichever spec you want, so I wouldn't really too much about that. But this is just kind of my thoughts. So let me know what you think. Am I wrong or right? Comment down below. Be civil about it. If you're uncivil, I will probably not be very pleased with that. But you know, that is what it is. It's the internet. Leave a like as well. If you enjoyed it, drop a sub button. I'll have M+ rankings out tomorrow. And then my Havoc guide out on Monday. So stay tuned for that. But with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Catch you guys next time. Hope you have a good rest of your day. Peace.